Alright, so this is the Fat Boy. I have not ridden a Fat Boy before, but when I first started looking at bikes, the Fat Boy was on my list early on. But knowing that I was buying a bike for commuting back and forth to work, I knew I needed some bags, and that was why I went over to the Heritage, because I wasn't really into buying a full-on touring bike, but ultimately I knew for a fact I wanted a Softail, my first bike, and I had to kind of move on past this Fat Boy. The Breakout was also on my list of bikes, but again, not having bags, and of course, yeah, you can add these things after the fact if you want to, but I was looking for more of a off-the-shelf solution, and again, my Heritage fit that bill, and I just love the styling of the Heritage. Forward foot controls, I didn't want to have something that I was kind of stretched out like that for a daily commuter, so again, back to the Heritage. But the Fat Boy, classic Harley Davidson styling, can't go wrong with it. So I think the Fat Boy is perfectly suited for somebody looking for a sportier cruiser, I guess I'd say, but not wanting that stretched out forward foot control riding position. I think this kind of fits the bill for that. Man, I tell you, right off the bat, even letting off the clutch, this bike has the 114. So the big thing with these bikes, actually that's different from my bike, obviously, is the fairing is a big difference. So it's always interesting to me when I hop on a bike that doesn't have a fairing, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot I love having a fairing. Yeah, these big tires really make it quite a bit harder to push through the turns. Not bad. If you're into the bike, don't buy it simply because of that, unless you're really trying to throw these things around. But that big fat tire definitely is felt, especially in those roundabouts. But yeah, I mean, the gauge clusters, I like the layout. It's very similar to my Heritage, with the old analog speedo with the digital tachometer and fuel gauge and all that. So as you see here, you can flip through. You probably can't even see it on the camera, so I won't go crazy with it, but I like that layout of gauges. It's really nice. I've gotten really used to it. Some people complain about fogging on these gauges. I've never experienced that, but I also live in Arizona, where it's typically dry and blazing hot. So I can't speak to that one way or the other, aside from the fact that I haven't experienced it. Now, wind coming off the front of this bike is it's very clean air. I don't feel anything too terrible to report. I know that my Heritage, when I take the windscreen off, it's a little bit dirtier of air, even at that 40 to 45 mile an hour range. You get a little bit of buffeting off that front end. With this, there's a real sleek look to that front end, and I think that plays a big part of how it sends that air up over top of you. Yeah, so not a whole lot to report as far as changes on these Softails. It's basically the same bike as what it's been for the last couple of years, which is not a bad thing. These Softails have incredible reviews from most of the people who I've seen producing content around these bikes. Everybody seems to love them. I know Blockhead is a big Softail guy himself, and there's a reason for that. These Softails are incredible. So if you're into power to weight ratio, smaller bike, a little bit easier to push around, generally speaking, obviously the Softail is going to be different, but I know personally I don't believe I would want to ride a bike without a fairing. Reason is it's a lot to deal with when you're up on the highway for longer rides. It kind of beats you up. I did a video, and you guys can check that out, I'll link that up above, of riding fairing versus no fairing. I just kind of wanted to do a video on really what the difference was. And if you're mainly just riding around town, not hopping up on the highway, not going for long commutes, I think the non-fairing is nice. You get a lot of air. It's it kind of help cool you off until you get over 100 degrees, and then at that point kind of starts cooking you a little bit. But yeah, I'm not personally a huge fan of non-fairing bikes. I'm just not a huge fan of bikes that don't have a windscreen. This is all subjective. One thing I've learned about having this YouTube channel is I could come around right now and tell you that this bike is the greatest bike that's ever existed, and there will be a guy who tells me I'm an idiot. I could say this is the worst bike that's ever existed, and some other guy will come out and tell me I'm an idiot. And usually the people that disagree with you are guys who spent their money on the bike and want to defend it. Yeah, this thing's hard to push around corners a little bit. I'm a little bit apprehensive on this bike pushing it around corners, more so than my own bike. Obviously it's a different bike, there's a learning curve there, but part of that is the tires. I can tell that just even kind of like leaning into this thing, it doesn't really enjoy it with that big rear tire. But anyhow, yeah, these bikes are all subjective. You know, I could tell you all kinds of great things and encourage you to go out and buy this bike, but really what it comes down to is you have to ride them yourself, because things that I hate about this bike, other people might find endearing and for some reason identify with that feature and argue with you about why it's the best thing about the bike. And who am I to tell them one way or the other? Who are any of us to tell you one way or the other? So I try to just produce these videos really from the approach of me just really kind of trying to be unbiased with my opinion. But again, I am just one guy with one opinion. That means you know, take it with a grain of salt. So personally, am I happy that I went with my Heritage? When I say yes, I'm coming from an approach of not just defending my Heritage because that's what I spent my money on. I know a lot of guys tend to kind of go that way. For me, again, as a daily commuter, I need some form of fairing or windscreen. It just makes sense. You know, for somebody else who's maybe not is concerned about that, yeah, you know, go with a non-fairing bike. I wouldn't tell you not to, but again, my approach is, personally, I am very happy with my decision with my Heritage, and the only thing I would do at this point is maybe go with a bigger bike for, again, more utility. Yeah, this thing is like a bear to push, man. But yeah, that 114 on these Softails, it gets up and goes. This bike, to me, if I was in my 20s and out doing like a bar hopping type of scene, this is the kind of bike I would have went for over top of my Heritage. Probably the Fat Boy or the Breakout. This is what I would go with if that's what I was looking for. But this bike, foot controls, very similar to my Heritage, very comfortable. This is a bike you could cruise on for really all day if you're not doing 90 miles an hour down the highway, which personally, I enjoy doing 90 miles an hour down the highway, but it would not be fun on this bike, or any bike that had no wind protection, in my opinion, until you get into a sport bike where you're hunched down and in the appropriate riding position to do those things. So I do like the overall look of this bike as you're kind of heading down the road. Just the view over the front end is it's good. You kind of have like a pretty good commanding view of the road here. So guys, with all that being said, this is the 2020 Fat Boy. I just wanted to take you guys out for a ride on a bike that I considered very much when I first started looking at these Softails, and let you know what I think about it, because I never actually really did that when I was out in the market to begin with, because I quickly kind of moved into the Heritage and a Streak Glide. I was kind of comparing the two, and you know, you guys know that I went with the Heritage. So again, with that being said, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. If this is your first time tuning in, please hit that subscribe button down below. Remember, likes go a long way to help support the channel, and I will see you guys next time. Alright, let's try to push this thing through the corners. Yeah, this is not a fun bike to push through a roundabout.